A lot has happened in App Store land lately, and Tim Sweeney is big mad at Tim Apple. But what else is new? I am beating the App Store drum again, and I am not sorry about it. We talk about this stuff from the perspective of video games, but it is super important. So stick with me and I will tell you exactly why Apple cut its take in App Store revenue down to 15%. And I'll tell you what that means for gaming and what it could mean for global tech policy. That is not hyperbole. It really could be that big of a deal. Come on, I'll tell you why. If you don't know me, my name is Matt Horton, but here on YouTube, I make videos about the things that I'm passionate about, like tech policy and video games and antitrust issues, or sometimes all three of those things in one video. This video is gonna be a trip, y'all. But basically, I bring you deep takes weekly on tech and gaming news. So if that sounds interesting to you, or if you want to get smarter about that kind of stuff, or if you just want to argue with me in the comments, please like this video and subscribe to the channel and you can see me weekly. So since the last time that we talked about the App Store, a few things have happened. First, Apple pulled Stadium, the custom browser built to run Google Stadia, from the App Store for extending WebKit in ways it wasn't supposed to. The developer Zachary Knox did this because the support for Bluetooth gamepads in WebKit just wasn't as good as the native support for Bluetooth gamepads. He ended up pulling the code and resubmitting the app, and it's back in the store, and you can use your Stadia controller and it will work just fine. Second, NVIDIA GeForce Now, Google Stadia, and Amazon Luna have all either announced or actually launched their browser versions of their services that work on iOS. You saw my video on Amazon Luna actually running on iOS in the browser, and spoiler alert, it's pretty great. And we do know that Microsoft is not that far behind. In fact, Phil Spencer just gave an interview to Nilay Patel of The Verge talking about the development of that browser-based solution.
But we have this avenue of a browser that works for us that we will go and build out, which gives us access, frankly, to a lot of devices. If the device is capable of running a capable web browser, we're going to be able to bring games to it.
Second and a half point, this actually means that Fortnite is kind of coming back to iOS because Fortnite is available on NVIDIA GeForce Now, complete with payments that go directly to Epic, since it runs in the browser and not in the App Store, and they don't have to play by the App Store's payment rules. That's pretty crazy. Now, this is only for NVIDIA GeForce Now subscribers and yada, 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 but it's still really interesting. And then third, the news that we're here for. Apple is reducing the revenue cut that they take from developers that make less than $1 million a year from 30% to 15%. And they did this by introducing a program called the App Store Small Business Program. Developers have to apply to be a part of the program. And if they make more than $1 million in a given year, the rest of the money they make that year will be charged the regular 30% cut. And they will have to wait another calendar year after that to reapply. This is huge for small developers. It's incredible. This is a 15% raise. And if you do the math, that's actually a 21% raise for small developers. These are not people getting super wealthy off of their apps. These are regular folks making money in the App Store that just got a 20% raise. That's incredible. This is a really wonderful move on the part of Apple, and it's going to help a ton of people. According to Sensor Tower's App Store metrics, about 98% of Apple's App Store developers would have access to the App Store Small Business Program, but it would affect only about 5% of App Store revenue if all of them signed up. That's nuts. This is such a smart move from Apple, and it's financially a good deal for all parties involved. And we'll talk about this later, but politically and from a PR perspective, it's also a pretty good move. But predictably, you have your detractors, and we have the same crew as we did last time. Tim Sweeney of Epic Games said Apple were hoping to remove enough critics that they can get away with their blockade on competition and their 30% tax on most in-app purchases. Now, I agree with like 60% of this thought, actually. But then Tim Sweeney went full Sweeney and went to compare Apple's control of the App Store to civil rights. And Tim, no, you can't do that. You can't make good points and then say stuff like that. No, Spotify put out a statement that was honestly not that much different than what they usually say and is honestly not worth reading here. DHH went on a Twitter thread to end all Twitter threads where he called Apple Machiavellian. He brought up the fact that this does not introduce any competition into App Store distribution or payment processing on the iPhone. And then he showed that he does not understand what a press embargo is. It was kind of embarrassing for everyone. Look, it is objectively incredible that Apple is reducing its cut for small developers. It is objectively good, okay? Objectively good. This is a good thing. Apple does not need that money, and it will do better in the hands of those smaller developers. I also happen to think that it would be better if Apple had some App Store competition. I just wish that the bearers of that flag were not Tim Sweeney and David Heinemeier Hansson. The thing that I keep thinking is, why did Apple do this? They very rarely make decisions that lose them money. Hell, they very rarely make decisions that don't make them money. And when I think about it, it comes down to two groups of people that they needed to reason with: regulators and developers. Let's look at developers first, actually. This has been a year where you could not turn around without another story of an app or an update being rejected by App Store review for some arcane rule, or an entire business or class of applications being rejected from the App Store. Hell, I've built a lot of this channel just on the concept of game streaming being rejected from the App Store. And Apple has had a rough relationship with its developers for a long time. Apple developers tend to be super fans, but when something like this happens, they're spicier than anyone else because this is their bottom line. This is their salary. And the thing is, Apple needs those developers. They've always got frameworks that they're introducing or deprecating, new features that they need developers to adopt. Right now, on the Mac side, Apple is in the middle of a transition from Intel processors to their in-house built M-series processors. And on those new M-series Macs, they run iOS apps. And they need those iOS apps to run better than they do right now. And that means this giant pool of iOS developers who have never built anything on the Mac, they need them to come over to that relatively smaller platform and make those apps better. It is valuable to Apple for those third-party apps to be as good as they can be. It is valuable to Apple for those developers to be as happy as they can be. So when Apple discovered that a relatively tiny percentage of their revenue would be affected, but an overwhelming majority of their developers would be eligible, they went ahead and flipped the switch. And developers are thrilled. I know a handful of small iOS developers, and they are ecstatic. They're talking about apps that they would have never thought to build before because it just wouldn't have been financially viable. There's going to be people that will build businesses that they never would have built before because of this change. This will change people's lives, even if it's just because come February, someone has just a little more cash during a pandemic. I mentioned this earlier, but a 15% decrease on the part of Apple actually equates to a 21.43% increase for an individual developer. Can you imagine getting a 21% raise today? You would be thrilled too. So this move made developers incredibly happy while they're making this transition. And I want to be clear here. This transition that they're making for the third time. And it's a transition that has killed almost every other company that has ever attempted it. They know what they're doing. Now, regulators. The 30% cut has been brought up a ton in antitrust conversation. It's been brought up alongside and unfortunately conflated with the idea of iOS app distribution competition. But I want to make sure that we call out that these two things are different. The idea that I am required to use the App Store if I want to launch an app on the iOS platform is separate from, but related to the idea that I have to pay Apple 30% of my revenue if I do so. That said, I believe that Apple sees this as a way to take some of the heat off. Google already has a DOJ case against them, and Apple doesn't want to be next. Now, Google was first because the GOP is convinced that there's some huge bias against the right, despite a bunch of evidence to the contrary. I don't think Apple is at much risk here, considering they don't own the same kind of content business. However, there is a much more competent administration entering the White House in January, and who is to say what a Biden DOJ appointee would do to Apple in 2021? And who's to say what the EU would do? Antitrust action in the EU is just completely different than it is in the US. And it's different because the standards are different. In the US, our standards are based on consumer harm, and our consumer harm standards are really based on price. Does the price go up? That's the idea. If the price goes up, consumers were harmed. It's kind of oversimplistic. In the EU, it's a little more freeform. Something like lack of access to a service or general anti-competitive behaviors could be enough to take action against Apple. You know, something like the intentional lack of iOS app distribution competition. Now, Apple's done a ton of things to try and show that they aren't anti-competitive just this year. They reduced their cut down to 15% for small developers. They stopped blocking bug fixes in app review. They allowed alternative default browsers and email on iOS. They allowed alternative music services on HomePod and Siri. They implemented new, more lenient and more clear App Store rules that directly addressed some of the App Store review problems that came up this year and last year. And they actually worked directly with some of these game streaming services to make sure that their implementations in the browser worked well. We saw this with Amazon Luna and with Google Stadia. And we're seeing rumors that in iOS 14.3, there may be an option to get alternative default apps suggested to you in onboarding on the iPhone. We saw something like this result in the browser ballot in the EU case against Microsoft. But none of this actually adds any competition in app distribution or payment processing. And that is why Apple's 15% cut makes me nervous. Not because I hate indie developers. I super don't. I know too many indie developers. I've been a developer before. I love you guys. Trust me, I'm here for you. It's just that I think it muddies the water. And I think it will result in not taking the action that we so desperately need. And even if this is solved, there is still a fundamental flaw in a world where the only way to get my app onto the iPhone is through the App Store, Test Flight, or building it myself. There are entire classes of apps that don't exist on iOS because Apple doesn't allow them to. Entire businesses. Look at the adult entertainment space. Nothing. In fact, dating apps, a bunch of them block a ton of their content. And some of them just frankly don't exist natively on iOS. You gotta go to the browser. And we can look at Android to find other classes of apps. Actually, we can go to the very hackily installed, although non-jailbroken, Alt Store. In there, you'll find a bunch of nefarious stuff like gaming emulators. We can talk about that later. But you'll also find things like a file browser, just a real file browser. It's just a file browser. There's nothing nefarious about it. Or you'll find things that the only reason they're not in the App Store is that they run a process in the background. The only reason these don't exist in the App Store is because they treat your iPhone or your iPad like a computer. And that's the issue. Apple doesn't want you to see these things. These like stupidly well-designed, probably faster than your laptop, extremely powerful machines as computers. Because if they admitted that they were computers, they would have to let you run whatever you wanted on them, like they do on the Mac. And they don't want to do it. I actually don't necessarily think that turning the iPhone into the Mac is the right answer, but it is clear to me at this point that the walls in this garden are too damn high. We don't need to blow the gates open, but we can at least get some competition in here. I am tired of the trends towards consolidation and verticalization because unchecked capitalism leads to monopoly. Somebody please come make them compete. Hey y'all, thanks for watching. Sorry it took so long to get this one out. It's actually been a full week. I had just enough time to grow this giant zit on my forehead right here. Anyway, if you liked this video, just like always, you can like the video on YouTube and subscribe. I've got some awesome videos coming. We're gonna do a video where I show you how to use the Stadia controller and we test out if the latency on Stadia is any better with that controller. I've also got a series coming up that I'm gonna be doing on the things that I love about both the PS5 and the Xbox Series X, because I have both of those consoles here at the house, and I just want to talk about what I love about them. So those are coming, so subscribe to the channel if that sounds interesting to you, and I will see you all next time.